The Subcommittee on Emergency Preparedness, Response, and Communications will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to review our ability to timely and effectively alert and warn the public in the case of an emergency. I want to welcome all witnesses here this morning on an issue that is vital to the protection of Americans: effective and reliable alerts and warnings. The numerous disasters and terrorist attacks that we've witnessed over the past few months have illustrated that timely communication is critical in an emergency situation, and the availability of critical information can help individuals protect themselves from harm's way. While some of us grew up in emergency alert warnings through television, radio, and I'm old enough to remember when they told us to get underneath our desks because there was a siren warning. Many alerts today are also received through mobile devices, the Internet, and even social media. Considering the technology advances that have been made over the past decade, we have high expectations for what our phones, tablets, and computers can do. At the very least, we expect that the alerts that come through our devices are timely, accurate, and only sent when necessary. During the Chelsea bombing in 2016, the New York City Emergency Management Department sent out 3 messages to the Chelsea neighborhood. 1, to alert individuals to shelter in place. 2, once the situation was cleared. And the 3rd one, to solicit the public's help in locating the suspect. These messages helped protect individuals at a time of uncertainty. It was also reported that they were received far outside the target area. While it is difficult to obtain 100% accuracy, I am glad that the FCC voted last week to require the delivery of alerts to 100% of the target area identified by the alert system with no more than 1/10 of a mile overshoot. This kind of accuracy will help to deter warning fatigue. This will help to deter warning fatigue. Unfortunately, there have been erroneous emergency alerts sent to the public that undermines the confidence in the system and the messages that are shared. We saw an example of this just this morning, when an alert that was supposed to be a test instead warned multiple locations on the East Coast that a tsunami was on its way. In addition, the erroneous emergency alert issued by the state of Hawaii on January 13, 2018, warning residents and visitors of a ballistic missile threat inbound to Hawaii, has caused the same concern of ours. Because this incident occurred due to human error, I am interested in hearing about the training, certification for message originators to ensure proper use of the system. In addition, I'm interested in knowing more about the safeguards that should have been in place and what, if anything, needs to be done on a federal level to make sure that this never happens again. In addition, to improve the response to terrorist events, I encourage the FCC to take action on multimedia alerts, many-to-one feedback, and multilingual messaging to further the effectiveness of alerts and warnings. For example, if New York City Emergency Management was able to send a picture of the suspect directly to recipients' phones during the Chelsea bombing, or if recipients were able to respond to the message to report that they saw the Chelsea bomber, it may have led to a faster apprehension of the suspect. However, enhancements to the system will be meaningless if basic awareness of how to use the system is not met. Considering the current threat environment in the United States, evidenced by many incidents over the past few months, including 2 terrorist attacks in New York City, one in October and the other in December of 2017, the accuracy and efficiency of wireless emergency alerts is critical. That way, when an imminent threat alert is sent, Americans can and will act accordingly to protect themselves and their loved ones. I want to thank all witnesses for being here today to share their expertise with us, and I look forward to our discussion. The Chair now recognizes my friend, the ranking member of this subcommittee, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, for an opening statement that he may have.
Good morning. And I'd like to thank Chairman Donovan for holding today's hearing to assess the state of our nation's alert and warning systems. Our ability to issue timely emergency alerts and warnings is an essential component of the national preparedness. We know when the public is warned early and given enough time to protect themselves and their property, we can limit the human toll and mitigate damage to our communities. Since the federal government began pursuing a national alert capability over 50 years ago, we have leveraged advances in technology to push alerts out to a larger population for the public more quickly. At the same time, the federal government has undertaken efforts to educate the public about alerts, warnings, and how important it is to respond to them. Ultimately, for the public alerts and the warnings to be effective, the public has to be able to trust them. This is why last month's false ballistic missile alert in Hawaii was so troubling. I am concerned that a single employee was able to issue an alert in the first place, and that it took nearly 40 minutes to issue a false alarm message over that platform. That said, false alerts are not limited to Hawaii. During a routine test of the emergency alert system last month, a false alert announcing an emergency in Morris County, New Jersey, interrupted programming for certain cable subscribers last month. After Hurricane Irma hit Florida last year, an alert issued in error by a state employee directed residents to boil their water, causing hours of confusion. What these incidents have taught us is that we need enhanced training and guidance for state and local governments that are authorized to issue emergency alerts through FEMA's Integrated Public Alert Warning System, or IPAWS. False alerting can be very dangerous, as it can lead to alert apathy, confusion, and unnecessary panic. Nevertheless, we should not allow these incidents to cloud the success of otherwise trustworthy emergency alert and warning systems. Wireless emergency alerts have been partially effective in keeping people out of harm's way, whether used to warn of inclement weather or a man-made attack. To date, 33,000 wireless emergency alerts messages have been disseminated. The majority of these messages have been weather-related and were instrumental in saving lives during last year's unusually active hurricane season and unprecedented wildfires. But it is important to note that the wireless emergency alerts were also sent after the Boston Marathon bombing and the Chelsea bombing in New York to help law enforcement catch the terrorist suspects. As we evaluate the existing alerts and warning systems, I'd be interested to learn what efforts are underway at the federal, state, and local level to integrate emerging technologies into alerts and warnings procedures. I look forward to engaging both panels about what has been working well with IPAWS and to gauge where improvement is needed. With that, I thank the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have two very distinguished panels before us today on this important topic. On our first panel, Mr. Antoine Johnson serves as the Director of Continuity Communications at the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In this capacity, he oversees the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. Ms. Lisa Folks serves as the Chief of the Federal Communications Commission's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. In this capacity, She manages the Commission's responsibilities related to alerts and warnings, 911 systems, and public safety communications. The witness's full written statements will appear on the record, and the Chair now recognizes Mr. Johnson for his 5-minute opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee. My name, as mentioned, is Antoine Johnson, and I'm the Director of Continuity Communications at FEMA. On behalf of Secretary Nielsen and Administrator Long, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, also known as IPAWS, and how it is used to save lives across the country. An effective and timely public alert and warning system is critical to communicating threats to the public, providing people with guidance during times of crisis. At FEMA, we manage IPAWS and its two main components: warnings and communications from the President in the event of a catastrophic national emergency through the National Public Warning System. And we manage geo-targeted alerts sent from federal, state, local, and tribal officials during emergencies such as those issued last year during hurricanes and wildfires. IPAWS allows those alerting authorities to send emergency messages to people in their geographic jurisdiction by emergency alert system broadcast through radio and TV, wireless emergency alerts to cell phones, broadcast from NOAA weather radios, and other internet-connected services. Today, IPAWS supports more than 1,000 federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial users, more than 26,000 radio, TV, and cable connections, 63 cellular carrier gateways reaching millions of cell phones, connections to NOAA dissemination systems, 73 internet vendors that tap into the alert feed, and we established a connection between IPAWS and Canada's multi-agency situational awareness system for the exchange of disaster information between our countries. Since inception of the system in 2012, there have been nearly 3 million messages disseminated through IPAWS. These messages, which cover everything from a natural disaster or active shooter to missing children and planned power outages, help communicate critical life-saving information to the public. For example, after a camp manager in Windsor, Connecticut, received a wireless emergency alert on her mobile device, she evacuated 29 children from a soccer dome just before an EF1 tornado touched down and ripped the roof off. In 2016, New York City sent a wireless emergency alert with an electronic wanted poster to identify a suspect in connection with bombings in Manhattan and New Jersey. The suspect was captured within hours. Last year, wireless emergency alerts were used by officials to issue warnings and evacuation orders in Texas, Florida, California in response to hurricanes and wildfires. Significantly, since 2012, 47 kidnapped children have been returned to their loved ones after an Amber Alert was issued through the system, and members of the community help law enforcement locate perpetrators. In addition to managing the IPAWS program, FEMA helps train users and create guidance and alerting authorities and software tool vendors. It's important to note that while FEMA manages the IPAWS system, we rely on our state and local partners to originate communications to their jurisdictions, as they are the boots on the ground that are best able to communicate the threats they face and provide specific protective action information related to their area. Following direction from Congress in the IPAWS Modernization Act of 2015, FEMA has established a subcommittee to the National Advisory Council. The subcommittee includes members from state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, communication service providers, organizations representing individuals with access and functional needs or limited English proficiency, and others. This subcommittee is consulting with IPAWS users and experts to consider new and developing technologies that may be beneficial to IPAWS and the nation. The subcommittee will develop recommendations on matters related to common alert and warning protocols, standards, terminology, and operating procedures. Through this subcommittee, we are looking at recent uses of the system, including use during the 2017 natural disasters, as well as the false alert in Hawaii, to identify lessons learned. In addition to this holistic review, there are some key areas in which the IPAWS program is focused for the future. First, we have been engaging vendors of IPAWS-compatible software to encourage better integration of IPAWS screens for consistency and creation of effective alert and warning messages. In collaboration with the partners, we continue to promote adoption and use of iPods by public safety officials. And we make sure that state, local, tribal, and government officials are aware of our iPods lab for testing to ensure they can maintain proficiency and understand the proper use of the system. I look forward to continuing to work with Congress and provide updates as we move forward with recommendations to continue to modernize the system and our procedures. I am grateful for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I am happy to respond to any questions the subcommittee may have at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. The chair now recognizes Ms. Folks for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss our nation's emergency alert systems. As I recently testified before the U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, the false ballistic missile warning issued on January 13th by the state of Hawaii was unacceptable. It resulted in widespread panic, and the extended period it took to correct the error, nearly 40 minutes, compounded the problem. Looking beyond the immediate consequences of the mistake, which were serious in and of themselves, this cry of wolf damaged the credibility of alert messaging, which can be dangerous when a real emergency occurs. The Commission acted swiftly to open an investigation into the matter. That investigation is ongoing, however. The FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau prepared a preliminary report at the Commission's January 30th open meeting. I have included the presentation made at the open meeting with my written statement for the record. But briefly, as the Bureau reported, it appears that the false alert was a result of two failures. First, simple human error. Second, the state did not have safeguards or process protocols in place to prevent that human error from resulting in the transmission of a false alert. Moving forward, the Commission will focus on ways to prevent this from happening again. Federal, state, and local officials throughout the country need to work together to identify any vulnerabilities to false alerts and do what is necessary to fix them. We also must ensure that, should a false alert nonetheless occur, a correction is issued promptly in order to minimize confusion. Emergency alerting systems provide timely and life-saving information to the public, and we must take all measures to bolster and restore the public's confidence in these systems. The Commission is also looking into the recent tsunami alerts issued following the 7.9 magnitude earthquake in the Gulf of Alaska on January 23rd to better understand how the Wireless Emergency Alert System, or WEA, performed. While the incidents in Hawaii and Alaska and other places are very present in our minds, we cannot lose sight of the fact that wireless emergency alerts have greatly enhanced public safety. In the last 5 years, WEA has been used to issue over 35,000 emergency alerts. Since WEA was first deployed in 2012, the Commission has taken significant steps to enhance alerting capabilities by leveraging advancements in technology. Just last week, the Commission voted to require participating wireless providers to deliver alerts in a more geographically precise manner. Specifically, participating wireless providers must deliver WEA alerts to the target area specified by the alert originator with no more than 1/10 of a mile overshoot by November 2019. This rule will help channel alerts to Americans who actually need them while reducing over-alerting. And equally important, this rule will give alert originators the assurance they need to rely on WEA as a valuable tool to help save lives. The recent order also requires that WEA alert messages remain available in a consumer-accessible format on wireless devices for 24 hours after receipt or until the consumer chooses to delete the message. Other enhancements to WEA include Spanish language alerting and increasing the length of alert messages from 90 to 360 characters. These changes will strengthen the WEA system and keep Americans safer. We also continue to work to advance the integrity and utility of the traditional emergency alert system. Just this past December, for example, the Commission adopted a new Blue Alert code that will allow state and local officials to notify the public of threats to law enforcement and help apprehend dangerous suspects. Blue alerts may be sent over both the EAS, which delivers warnings to the public via radio and television, and WEA. Over the past several years, the FCC has also worked closely with FEMA to conduct nationwide tests of the EAS to assess its reliability and effectiveness. The most recent test was conducted last September, and our initial analysis shows improvements in most areas from the previous year. In closing, we look forward to partnering with emergency management professionals, industry, and our federal partners on the alerting capabilities that they need to use Alert America's public alert and warning systems with confidence during times of crisis. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mrs. Falk, for your testimony. I now recognize myself 5 minutes for questions. They're scheduling votes somewhere between 11 and 11:15, so we're going to try to get through everyone's testimony and allow all our members. I ask unanimous consent to have Ms. Jackson Lee from Texas sit on our panel with us. Seeing no objection, welcome, Ms. Jackson Lee. I have a question for both of you, and in any order which you'd like to speak about it. As I mentioned in my opening statement, it's vital that the public have confidence in our alert system that they receive from the government, and I fear that the erroneous alert that occurred in Hawaii may erode that trust and lead some people from opting out of the system. So as you continue to review what happened in Hawaii, do you have any recommendations now? I know your investigation is in its initial stages, but is there any recommendations that you could share with us now after what you've already been able to review on what we could do to prevent that from happening again?
At this point, the Bureau and the Commission have not announced any specific recommendations. As you say, our investigation is ongoing, and the plan is once we've completed that investigation, we may have recommendations to share.
Thank you, Congressman. From the FEMA perspective, we are conducting an after-action review of the events of January 13th. And I think there are a number of things that we can do to ensure that the eroded public confidence that has resulted from this mishap on January 13th is improved over time. One of the things that we can do and that we are doing within FEMA is taking every step that we can take to ensure that this does not happen again. Secondly, I think there's the opportunity for us to work with the software tool vendors that provide these applications to state and local governments for their use to improve those tools. And in fact, we have met with and talked to the vendor that provides that software application to the state of Hawaii, as well as 47 other state and local governments. They will be rolling out this week improvements to their system or their software to prevent against these types of errors from occurring in the future. Secondly, we are revisiting our training to ensure that our training adequately addresses the type of error that took place on January 13th so that emergency management officials are properly prepared to respond to that type of event, even when it's an error. And then thirdly, we would suggest that there be a broad public information campaign, both on the part of state and local government, to inform citizens of what these technologies are and what they mean to the public when these messages are received. But we also think there should be a broader overarching public information campaign that would include things like testing, exercising, to make sure that we include the whole of community in our exercise program so that the entire community is better prepared to deal with any threat to public safety that they may face.
I understand that you haven't completed your investigation. I know some of the recommendations of the things that we've been reading about would include not having one person make the determination that this alert should be issued, having the alert be in two different places, so even if it is one person, they would have time, they'd have to go to multiple locations to send the alert. Why the same mechanism of issuing the alert wasn't used in Hawaii to allow the public to know that it was a test. Apparently it was not pushed through the system that was, the recalling of the alert wasn't pushed through the same system that sent the alert. It was used other mechanisms such as social media and whatnot. And as my friend Don Payne said, it took nearly 40 minutes for that to happen. There was something I read where people were saying maybe the federal government is the only ones that should be allowed to issue such an alert. Could you speak on any of those items here before the committee now?
Thank you, Congressman, Chairman Donovan. Would be happy to speak on those issues. The event of what took place on January 13th at 8:07 in the morning was certainly a tragic event. I think what we're seeing now, as you mentioned, the two-factor validation of a message. We have seen that take place in some of the more, in major cities. In fact, I think the next panel will speak to some of those best practices that are emerging throughout the community. Those type things where you have two-factor or two-person validation of a message before it's sent works in our major cities where their emergency operations centers are well-staffed and they have the personnel to perform that function. It doesn't work as well in rural areas where the chief of police in a single office may be the person who's responsible for sending that message to the public in response to any threat to public safety. But I do think that where appropriate, we will see those type best practices emerge within the community. Two-factor authentication, additional software checks or validation checks in the software that is being used by our state and local partners. I think what we'll see in addition to that is better training, very thorough review of the procedures, the policies and procedures that are employed to send these messages, and FEMA will be prepared to work with our state and local partners in every aspect of that. In fact, I see that there's a natural progression from the guidance that we issued in 2015 to software vendors, wherein the initial offerings of those tools that were made available to state and local government, for example, did not include a cancel function. Although the tool would allow them to originate a message, there was no ability to cancel the message. And so in 2015, we worked with the vendor community and issued recommendations to them on things that they could do to improve their software applications. We are likewise doing the same thing with the vendor community and looking at other opportunities that they may have to improve their tools to ensure that those type of errors that occurred on January 13th do not occur again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. My time is running out. Ms. Volk, can you tell me in 15 seconds, you were talking about how we're going to expand the ability. We're going to have multilingual alerts. We're going to be able to push out photographs. We've expanded the amount of characters that could be on an alert. Do we have a time frame for those things? Are some of those in place now? And in the future, how long would you see that coming to fruition for us?
The rules that the commission adopted regarding the extension of the character limit from 90 to 360, as well as the requirement that participating wireless carriers support Spanish language alerts, would go into effect in May of 2019. The geo-targeting rule that was adopted just last week would go into effect in November of 2019. And the reason for this is to allow time for the industry to do standards development, testing, and then whatever upgrades they need to their networks and devices.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Johnson, in light of the incident in Hawaii, is FEMA considering implementing any additional requirements, such as ongoing training, multi-person alert verifications, or false alert plans of the state and local our state and local governments seeking to become alert originators as well?
Thank you, Ranking Member Payne. With regards to the requirements for a state or local, territorial, or tribal government to gain access to IPAWS, there are basically 4 steps that any alerting authority would go through in order to become an alerting authority. First, they must have a valid software that interfaces with IPAWS. And that software has to meet certain development requirements that we have established with the software tool providers. It has to go through testing and should have demonstrated that it is capable of processing a common alert protocol. The second requirement that we have for state and local officials is that they enter into a memorandum of agreement with FEMA to establish what's called a common operating group, or a COG. That group is similar to a distribution list that allows the state or local government to share information inside of the system. The third step, that if they wish to become a public alerting authority, is that they have to enter into a memorandum of agreement that defines the geographic area that they're requesting this public alerting authority for, as well as the types of messages that they intend to send through the system and the dissemination channels over which that information would go. The last step is that's required of the state and local governments is that they take our IS-247A course. That's the IPOS training that's administered by the Emergency Management Institute. Since 2013, we know that there have been well over 20,000 people that have taken that training. In addition to that memorandum of the requirements of the MOA, we also require that every person that interfaces with that software that touches IPOS also take that IPOS IS-247A training. We make additional resources available to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments through our lab that's located in Indian Head, Maryland, so that they can maintain proficiency in the use of the software. That affords them the opportunity to create test messages in a safe environment and return the results to them so that they have a clear understanding of how that message will appear over radio, television, as well as wireless emergency alerts on mobile devices.
Are you planning additional requirements with respect to ongoing training and that type of thing? With this, the human error that was caused for the false alarm in Hawaii. What is the redundancy that we can look for so we take that out of the equation as much as possible?
Thank you, Congressman. One of the things that I'll share is that we were already undergoing a complete review of our training courses that are hosted by the Emergency Management Institute. We will likewise double back and conduct additional reviews of that training to ensure that these types of scenarios or similar type of events that occurred in Hawaii on January 13th, as well as others that we've observed across the country, are properly factored into our training offerings, and we will look into making additional training beyond our IS-251 course, which is a more advanced training that we encourage alerting authorities to take. We are looking at revamping that and considering refresher training on an annual basis as well.
Okay, well, Mr. Chair, my time is just about up, so I'll yield. So Ms. Jackson Lee can.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Ms. Jackson Lee from Texas.
Let me thank the chairman and the ranking member for their extended courtesies and thank the witnesses for their presence here today. Although we are asking questions in a very calm manner, this had to be a hair-raising, on-fire incident. In fact, it could have generated enormous loss of life by people's own panic. I guess if it had continued long, most of us remember visibly seeing a panicked parent putting his child in a manhole. That will be a constant memory. Certainly if it was a real incident, we know that people would be seeking any way to save their lives. One of the things that I wanted to take note of is, if you all can comment, though you're here on the communications aspect, working with state emergency centers on how people do evacuate. I did not get a sense from the video that people were even evacuating in any sort of orderly manner or even knew what to do. But I'll put that on the table as a concern. But let me indicate that the individual employee has broken his silence and said that it was real. He didn't hear any words, exercise, exercise. It was real, and he maintains that. I'd like you to respond to that, but I also want to respond to these questions that, as I understand the facts, that once the mistake was realized, the employee who initiated the real-world alert was prompted to send out the cancel message on something called AlertSense. But at no point did the employee assist in the process. Has any of your agencies looked extensively as to why that did not happen? And then secondarily, since this is such a massive notice and Hawaii is so positioned in the Pacific, And I understand there was a call to the Pacific Command, or that it is well connected, because he indicated that there was a missile alert, that there was no safeguard measures to withdraw the alert. So if you would answer the questions about the employees, or not respond to employees, but that there was his representation that it was it was an incident without the exercise, how that could be possible. Number two, how it could be possible if you're prompted, or was that discovered, that you were prompted to send out a cancel message or an alert sense, and that was not done, or is that automatic, so that the employee or the person who was obviously in shock or whatever their condition was, that the alert goes out automatically, that it should be canceled? And then, were there no safeguards measures to withdraw the alert? And if you could answer those, I'd appreciate it.
With respect to the employee statement that there was no exercise at the front and end, we actually sent agents to Hawaii to speak to personnel in the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency. And from the information that they have given us, and as well as other discussions that we have had, including other people that were in the room, there was, at the beginning and at the end, exercise. Now, the warning officer who is transmitted the alert has refused to talk to the FCC. But in discussions with Hawaii Emergency Management, he submitted a written statement in which he claims he didn't hear the exercise at the beginning or the end. Now, the problem with the alert wasn't the exercise. The problem was with respect to their script. It said, "This is not a drill," which wasn't consistent with Hawaii's Emergency Management Agency. He claims, at least according to that statement, that that's all he heard. And so he thought it was a live event, and ergo initiated a live alert. With respect to cancellation and correction, just to explain, the cancellation piece only stops the alert from retransmitting. So, for example, on WIA, if you have your cell phone off and they issue a cancellation, then your phone won't get it. So the cancellation in and of itself, which they were able to do, didn't solve all of the problem. The bigger problem was that, from the preliminary findings that we've made, is that Hawaii Emergency Management Agency never contemplated the possibility that they would ever issue a false alert. And so they did not have protocols in place, standard operating procedures to address that. With respect to the WIA and EAS, they had to figure out what code to issue. They talked to FEMA personnel on what was about a 45-second phone call. Then somebody had to go log in and actually write the correction message, because they did not have a template for that. So that was really the problem with the delay in issuing the correction. They never contemplated that they would ever have a false alert. So in this instance, when it happened, they weren't prepared for it.
Mr., you wish to comment?
Thank you. Your question about an automatic withdrawal of the information from, or the message from the system.
Right, because they had to write, as she said, they were sending out emails and posting it on their personal Facebooks as one of the ways they were responding.
Yes, so as Ms. Folks described, with the cancellation of the message, which we know took place within minutes, as she described, that automatically takes the message out of the network so that it's not rebroadcast. That is a deliberate action that the employee had to take to cancel that message within the network. The follow-up message to send out a corrective, kind of a corrective action type message, was also a deliberate action that the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency was not prepared for. Typically, we exercise for success when it comes to the types of messages that we send and the deliberate actions that we would wish the public to take. In this case, I would say that if there was any confusion on the part of Hawaii Emergency Management as to their authority to send that message, or if there was any question as to the type of message that should be sent, and in this case, it was a civil emergency message that was issued to correct the error that had occurred at 8:07. When there's that type of uncertainty in the community, that points back, in my opinion, to some of our training offerings. And that's where we're going to address this, is through training and increased awareness and working with our federal, state, and local partners. But those are all deliberate actions on their part that they must take and be prepared for in terms of addressing any type of error that occurs with some errant message that is put out in the system.
I'm going to yield back. I want to thank the ranking member. Well, let me thank the witnesses, and let me thank the ranking member and the chairman for their courtesies. And I just want to pose this question on the record, not for an answer. I'm maybe getting pieces of this, but to me, it appears that this should be raised to a federal level, establishing protocols. This was, I think, one of the more frightening incidences that happens in a state, and the state is left to their own devices and protocols of which they did not have, and this could have been catastrophic. So I yield back with that question posed. Thank you so very much.
I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony. Members of our subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and I would ask that you would respond to those in writing. This panel is now dismissed, and I ask the clerk to prepare the witness table for the second panel. Thank you both very much for sharing your expertise with us. I'd like to welcome our second panel to today's hearing and thank all of you for your participation. Mr. Benjamin Krakauer serves as the Assistant Commissioner for Strategy and Program Development at the New York City Emergency Management Department. He currently serves on FEMA's National Advisory Council Integrated Public Alert and Warning Committees. I'd now like to yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne, to introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Director Peter T. Gaynor. Is the director of the Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency and was appointed by Governor Gina Raimondo in January of 2015. As the director, he serves as the policy advisor to the governor on emergency management matters and serves as the liaison between the Federal Emergency Management Agency and all local emergency management offices throughout the state. Welcome, sir.
Mr. Scott Bergman serves as Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Cellular Communications Industry Association and is responsible for coordinating federal regulatory issues for the association affecting the wireless industry, including spectrum, broadband, and public safety policymaking. Mr. Sam Matheny, I had it, Sam, is the Chief Technical Officer at the National Association of Broadcasters. He is also a member of the FCC Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperable Council, and a member of the Academy of Digital Television Pioneers. The witnesses' full written statements will appear on the record. I thank you all for appearing today and sharing your expertise with us, and the Chair now recognizes Mr. Krakauer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the Subcommittee for the opportunity to speak with you today about emergency alerts and warning. We take this issue very seriously in New York City and have invested considerable resources in it over the past decade, thanks in part to funding from the Urban Area Security Initiative. New York City's opt-in emergency public information system, Notify NYC, began in 2007, and to date has sent out more than 10,000 messages. New York City Emergency Management maintains a cadre of public warning specialists who work in our 24/7 Emergency Operations Center around the clock. The majority of our messages are translated into the top 13 languages spoken in the city, including American Sign Language. Nearly 675,000 people have enrolled in Notify NYC, and we've begun to see large increases through our recently released mobile application, which allows users to get messages based on their present location, has a mapping interface so users can view their location relative to the location of an emergency, and streamlines the enrollment process to promote user adoption. While we're very proud of Notify NYC and continue to market and promote it across New York City's 675,000 subscribers in a city of 8.5 million residents is not enough. To expand our reach during the most critical emergencies, New York City relies on the Federal Wireless Emergency Alert System. New York City helped test the system with FEMA, the FCC, and the wireless industry in 2011, and has activated the system 8 times since 2012. 3 times during Hurricane Sandy, 2 announcing travel bans in response to severe winter weather, and 3 related to the terrorist bombing in Chelsea. Our experience with WEA during emergencies shows us the power of the system, but it also highlights its shortcomings. We appreciate the attention that the FCC has paid to our concerns, adopting rules that permit the inclusion of links and telephone numbers, improve geo-targeting requirements, and will soon allow longer messages and messaging in Spanish. However, the new rules are not as comprehensive as we would hope, and therefore we feel that the effectiveness of the system is still limited. For example, missing from the FCC's latest order is multimedia alerting, many-to-one communication, and multilingual alerting beyond Spanish. Further, the law still permits consumers to opt out of receiving WEA messages from localities, which we strongly oppose. We must have the ability to embed multimedia in WEA messages. This major gap was demonstrated when the NYPD needed the public's assistance in locating the suspected Chelsea bomber before he detonated another device. New York City issued a citywide WEA that included the suspect's name, age, instructions to call 911 if seen, and a statement, see media for PIC. Since there's no capability to include images in WEAs, unlike the tens of millions of picture and video messages that are sent between consumers on a daily basis, recipients of the message needed to find a different source to see the suspect's photo. To quote a recent letter sent to Chairman Pai from New York City Police Commissioner James O'Neill, "We cannot continue to rely on the public taking this extra step. The law enforcement community can no longer afford to depend on a wireless emergency response system that is lagging far behind what technology can offer." The Chelsea bombings highlighted this major weakness in the wireless emergency alert system. Millions of New Yorkers who wanted to help us find the suspect were given no other option but to take the additional time to search for his photo. That time is often a commodity we can't afford to waste, end quote. In surveying New Yorkers after the fact, we found that only 45% of message recipients took that extra step to look for the photograph. Today's WEA system is one-directional and does not permit users like New York City to determine how many devices received a message, nor does it offer the public the ability to respond to a WEA to provide information back to us. The ability to rapidly collect and aggregate de-identified but location-specific information would allow for the more efficient deployment of scarce resources following an emergency. When the WEA system was first created by Congress, it required that the public have the right to opt out of receiving messages from all originators except for the President. A common tenet among emergency managers is that all emergencies begin and end locally. Local alert originators need the unfettered ability to reach messages during an emergency. False alerts and poorly targeted messages lead to consumer opt-outs and prevent people from receiving future messages that may save their life. We encourage Congress to change the law to eliminate the opt-out provision. In closing, the wireless emergency alert system is one of the greatest advances in public alert and warning in our country's history and has been used thousands of times across the country to protect lives and property. It is a cornerstone element of our public alert and warning strategy in New York City. However, the capability offered by WEA has not kept up with the advances in technology and with how people use their mobile phones. WEA needs further enhancement to support today's threats and hazards. New York City looks forward to working with Congress, our federal partners, and the wireless industry to improve this important tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krakow. The chair now recognizes Mr. Gaynor for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's a pleasure to appear before you today to discuss the critical importance of reliable alert notification communication systems at the state, local, and federal levels that we depend on within the state of Rhode Island to successfully achieve our mission. These systems, plans, policies shape their use, and the personnel that train, maintain, and operate them are a core function of preparedness and response across the country. My name is Pete Gaynor, and I'm the Director for Emergency Management for the state of Rhode Island. I'm also the Chair for the state's Interoperable Communications Committee, responsible for ensuring alert notification and communication systems are properly governed, aligned, and integrated. I have submitted my full statement to the committee, which I asked to be made part of this hearing today. Today, I want to briefly describe to the subcommittee, first, a snapshot of those alert and warning communication systems and their use within the state of Rhode Island. Second, what we have done since the Hawaii false alert. And finally, some insights and recommendation for a stronger, more resilient alert and warning communication system nationwide. First, let me describe our system from the local level up. In 2015, the state of Rhode Island invested in a commercial mass notification system called Code Red. Using the Emergency Management Performance Grant, we purchased on behalf of all the communities, 39 communities, and selected state agencies, a singular, common system in order to remove duplication of effort, improve operational efficiencies, and save precious local, state, and federal funding resources. Authorized and trained agents at the local level can launch any public safety-related alert within their jurisdiction. The state has the capability to launch on the behalf of any single municipality, multiple municipalities, or the entire state, depending on the threat or hazard. In 2017, August of 2017, we completed a long overdue update of the state's emergency alert system plan and system. We have spent significant energy to ensure plans, procedures, equipment, training, safeguards, and testing are up to date and fully operational. This remains an ongoing priority for the state. We continue to rely on other core federal systems such as FEMA's National Warning System and National Radio System to ensure we have multiple communication paths. Since January 2018 Hawaiian false ballistic missile alert was issued, we have redoubled our efforts to review plans, procedures, policies, redundancies, training, authorized users, the functionality of equipment, interoperability, and the safety measures to ensure we fully understand the strengths, the weaknesses, and the potential gaps of all our alert, warning, and communication systems. We have revalidated our internal launch and approval process to ensure prescriptive messaging is common across all our platforms, to include recall messaging should an erroneous alert be triggered. This process continues today. In New England, at both the state and federal level, we are in the process of reviewing past practice for alert and warning procedures, such as those outlined in FEMA's National Warning System Operations Manual, to make sure that the published guidelines and instructions are logical, executable, and reasonable after what happened in Hawaii. As outlined in the manual, threats posed by natural and man-made disasters or enemy attack make it imperative for state, local, territorial, and tribal governments to have access to an effective and reliable means of communication with which to warn the public of impending emergencies so they may take preventive actions. My fellow New England directors and I completely support the premise and are working diligently to ensure we have a safe, secure, and reliable alert and warning system. In conclusion, in addition to reviewing and validating our systems, I believe we have created what I call a technology trap. I believe this problem is similar to the military with their GPS and digital mapping. Will our soldiers be able to navigate with a pencil and a paper map and a compass should the GPS constellation be disrupted? Can we as emergency managers communicate in a world where any combination of a cyber attack, power disruption, or natural hazard takes out our digital alert and warning communication networks? Are we ready to communicate and warn in an analog world? Can we communicate to our citizens without cell phones and the internet? The harsh reality of on the fundamentals of communicating in a degraded environment. And finally, review the DHS security clearance program to ensure the right decision makers throughout every level of the emergency management system have the correct clearance level, so matters like threat briefs and critical time secure communications can seamlessly, rapidly, and securely occur. Thank you, Chairman Donovan and subcommittee members, for the opportunity to prepare in front of you today.
Thank you, Mr. Gaynor. The votes that were called, we're going to try to get through your testimony first, then take a short break, and we'll come back for questions. Chair now recognizes Mr. Bergman.
Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the critical and successful role of wireless emergency alerts. CTIA and the wireless industry commend Congress for passing the WARN Act, which established the Wireless Emergency Alert, or WEA, a partnership between the wireless industry, government, and public safety officials. Since its launch 5 years ago, wireless emergency alerts have become an essential tool for Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans who rely on their mobile phones every day. Today, wireless providers who serve over 99% of U.S. subscribers participate in WEA voluntarily. More than 33,000 wireless emergency alerts have been sent, helping to locate those in danger and warn of imminent threats or disasters. CTI members are deeply committed to ensuring that WEA remains a trusted, secure, and effective resource for the American public. So the recent false alarm in Hawaii underscores the importance of our collective efforts to ensure the functionality and the integrity of our nation's emergency alert systems. With that in mind, my testimony today will address the vital role that WEA plays, our ongoing efforts to improve its capabilities, and the importance of maintaining the system's integrity. A decade ago, Congress recognized the value of wireless emergency alerts to reach Americans wherever they are. Now, as more than half of American households are wireless only, WEA has become an essential tool for public safety. As part of our broader national alerting system, federal, state, and local authorities transmit emergency messages to FEMA. FEMA authenticates and formats those messages and sends them out to the various different alerting systems. And wireless providers deliver authorized WEA messages to a particular geographic area as determined by the alert authorities. Wireless providers do not control the content of messages and do not exercise discretion over whether to send them. Because local authorities can target specific geographic areas, they're extremely effective at reaching those Americans directly impacted by an emergency. And WEA's unique sound and vibration help ensure that everyone can be aware of the alert. Wireless emergency alerts have helped to address terrorist threats, locate suspects, like in the 2013 Boston bombing and the 2016 Chelsea bombing, and they've helped return abducted children, and they've warned millions of people in the path of severe weather events. And we continue to expand and improve WEA's capabilities. In the past year, the FCC adopted rules to expand the content that authorities can send, adding additional characters, Spanish language, blue alerts, and downloadable content through embedded links, as well as supporting additional testing by state and local authorities. The wireless industry has supported these enhancements because our members are committed to the proven life-saving success of WEA. Just last week, the FCC adopted an order that further improves WEA's geo-targeting capability. Today, WEA alerts can be targeted down to the cell sector level, a significant improvement over the original county-level targeting. The FCC's new approach will take advantage of innovative device-based solutions to further target those alerts. The wireless industry is undertaking significant standards, testing, and deployment work to support this capability. The FCC's deadlines are aggressive, but the wireless industry will work intently to implement them. Finally, the false alert in Hawaii underscores that public confidence must be our highest priority. Alert originators must send warnings appropriately and judiciously. FEMA must authenticate messages quickly and accurately, and providers must deliver them to the targeted area. We commend this committee and Chairman Pai at the FCC for working quickly to identify lessons learned from the false alert, and we appreciate Commissioner Rosenworcel's call for additional best practices. While there will be many lessons learned, this event does demonstrate that the technical capabilities of WEA function. Policymakers and the public should have confidence that in the event of a real emergency, wireless emergency alerts can send information rapidly and effectively. Let me also stress that the wireless industry is keenly focused on the security of our networks, including those that support WEA. Through a combination of technologies, policies, and best practices, we work closely with our government and public safety partners to further our common goal of a trusted WEA system. CTI is proud of the critical role that WEA plays in our national alert system, and we're committed to working collaboratively to maintain public confidence. Thanks for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. Chair now recognizes Mr. McTheney for opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Donovan, Ranking Member Payne, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Sam Matheny, and I am the Chief Technology Officer at the National Association of Broadcasters. On behalf of the thousands of free, local television and radio broadcasters in your hometowns, thank you for inviting me to testify on the emergency alert system, how broadcasters fulfill their role as first informers, and how innovation will allow broadcasters to do even more to keep viewers and listeners safe during emergencies. Broadcasters take seriously their role as the most trusted source of news and emergency updates, whether it's preparing listeners and viewers for the coming storm, directing them to needed supplies and shelter during the disaster, or helping rebuild in the aftermath. Local stations are part of the communities they serve, and broadcasting is sometimes the only available communications medium in an emergency when wireless networks fail. Morning Consult recently found that the American people turn to broadcasters in times of emergency by a factor of more than 3 to 1. Broadcasting is unique for the following reasons. First, broadcasting covers virtually everyone. Broadcast signals reach more of the U.S. population than any other communications medium. Broadcasting is localized. Local broadcast stations can deliver market-specific information as well as national alerts. Broadcasting has no bottlenecks. An emergency alert can reach millions of people simultaneously without concern over network congestion. Broadcasting is redundant. There are numerous independently operated stations in each market that deliver alerts. And broadcasting is resilient. Stations often operate with backup equipment, generators, and fuel supplies to stay on the air. Broadcaster information is actionable. Radio and television can provide enough information to enable people to understand what is happening and what steps they should take. Finally, broadcasters are trusted. They are members of the local community and speak not just as an authority, but as a neighbor. But broadcasters do more than just deliver messages to the public. Broadcasters are also the backbone of the emergency alert system. Working with the government since the 1950s, broadcasters have operated and evolved a nationwide wireless network to deliver emergency alerts. This daisy chain of broadcast stations ensures that emergency alerts can be delivered independent of internet connectivity and even when power outages may disrupt other forms of communication. In fact, broadcasters serve as primary entry points for emergency communications to the public and are thus part of the solution from beginning to end. Because broadcasting plays such an important role in this critical communications infrastructure, it is vital that the government support and foster broadcasting. I'd like to briefly outline 3 key areas for your consideration. First, broadcasters are in the final and most complicated phase of the incentive auction, the repack phase. Nearly 1,000 television stations will be moving to new channel assignments, and this will also impact over 700 FM radio stations on co-located towers. Broadcasters need the time and money required to make these moves successfully and without impairing the public's ability to access emergency alerts. I ask for your support of the Viewer Protection Act and the Radio Consumer Protection Act, and urge their passage, as no station should be forced off the air due to lack of funds or unreasonable time constraints. Second, broadcasters have been working with the wireless phone manufacturers and service providers on market-based solutions to activate the FM chips that are in smartphones. Our market efforts have been successful, with one very notable exception: Apple. We believe Apple should be encouraged to activate the FM tuner in future models of their iPhone, as it will improve people's access to vital information in times of disaster. And third, the Next Generation Television Standard, ATSC 3.0, which was recently approved by the FCC, has many features that will improve emergency alerting, including the ability to wake up sleeping television sets, more precise geo-targeted alerts, and sending rich multimedia files such as weather radar images, evacuation maps, and even video files with detailed explanations of the emergency and what to do. New regulatory hurdles should not be placed in our way as we deploy NextGen TV. In conclusion, in emergencies large and small, our nation and your hometowns benefit from a strong and vibrant broadcast industry. FEMA calls broadcasting a redundant, resilient, and necessary alerting pathway. I agree. Thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Matheny. The subcommittee now stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair. We will reconvene right after votes. Thank you. certified votes. I thank the witnesses for their opening statements. I now recognize myself 5 minutes for questioning. Mr. Krakow, I wanted to ask you about New York City issuing a wireless emergency alert during the Chelsea bombing, as you testified about in your opening statement. Thank you. How effective was the tool for New York City and our public service agencies?
So I think it was a very effective tool. Our first two messages were highly targeted to several square block area in the Chelsea neighborhood. The first message was at the request of NYPD directing people in the area to shelter in place when that secondary device was discovered. And then the second message went to the same area and directed people the shelter in place order had been lifted because the bomb squad from NYPD successfully contained that device. The challenge we saw with that message is even though we highly geo-targeted it to the Chelsea neighborhood, we received anecdotal reports from other parts of Manhattan, other boroughs, one case in New Jersey. So people far outside that target area did receive that message. That concerns us from a warning fatigue perspective. People who receive messages that are not aimed for them or not intended for them are more likely to opt out of the system, which is why we've been encouraged by the FCC's latest rules and working with industry on improving geo-targeting. The citywide message that went out the following Monday looking for the suspect ultimately led to his capture. So that was a very successful message. Would have been more successful, however, if we were able to embed an image in that message as opposed to indicating the public should go to the media to see the picture.
And as you know, I live in New York City as well. We're unique compared to some other geographic areas of our country because we have subways. Do you find difficulties? Are the alerts effective in the subways? I forget how many millions of riders we have every day. And because of our subway system, that is also a target for potential terrorist attacks. Do you find that the alert system is adequate in the uniqueness of trying to push those messages out to people who might be riding on our subways?
So right now, if you're able to get wireless service on your device, which is the case in most subway stations, you should receive the WIA message. The challenging part would be if you're in between stations where there's not wireless service yet, particularly from the networks. I know that the MTA is working on improving that. That said, we are in touch on a regular basis through our Emergency Operations Center, Watch Command, with the Rail Control Center. So if we do need to get a message to the MTA, we talk to them directly dozens of times a day about lots of incidents.
Mr. Bergman, can you talk about industry's capabilities and making sure that the uniqueness of New York City's subway riders and are protected as well as the people who are above ground?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly happy to. And, we continue in the wireless industry to be very supportive of the Wireless Emergency Alert Program, recognize the important role that it plays. And you talked a little bit about the importance of that it played in the Chelsea bombing. And in response to that, we're continuing to do things to make WIA even stronger by improving the geo-targeting, by building in that ability to access embedded links so that you can get those kinds of pictures and actionable information. So that's very much a focus for us. And then in terms of coverage, our members, I know, have worked closely with the subway authorities and have wireless service now in, I think, all 284 of the stations in Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. And, as Mr. Krakauer said, the challenge is inside the tunnels and getting access to the tunnels when trains run, 24/7 to make sure that you can deploy there. But wireless infrastructure siting is one of our top priorities, and making sure that we can build our infrastructure out there to make sure that we get as much coverage and as much capacity as possible is one of our top priorities in the wireless industry.
Thank you. In my last minute, could you talk a little bit about, right now, I could send you a photograph of my 2.5-year-old daughter. Mr. Krakauer can't shoot out a photograph of the Chelsea bomber. What are the obstacles, and are we going to be able to overcome those?
Sure. So, we've certainly strengthened our capability with the ability to send an embedded link so that you can get that picture. Sending it in the message involves additional capabilities, and part of the way we built WIA is using a different technology. It's called cell broadcast technology, and we did that so that we could make sure that we get the message to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. We're talking within seconds, not within minutes. That's different than a typical text message that you and I might send. And if I send it to 3 people in this room, you might get the text message right away, and somebody else might get it 5 minutes or an hour later. we want to make sure that message gets there immediately. And so that's really been the focus and the priority.
My limited understanding, because my VCR still flashes 12 back home, is that, and you have to tell some of the younger people in the audience what a VCR is, but it's the less amount of data in the message will get it out quicker. The more complicated the data is, or the more space that it will take up, the slower the message delivery is.
I think you've put your finger on it, and I would think about it in two ways. One is the technology was built using this cell broadcast technology that wasn't built to incorporate that multimedia. So that's an additional capability that we have to build out. And the second piece is just making sure that we're being cognizant of congestion on networks. If we're looking to send out a message to 8.5 million people in New York City, we want to make sure that then those networks are available to contact public safety or to contact their loved ones in the case of an emergency.
Since we only have two other members to ask questions, I'm going to take the liberty to ask you one more. Are we able to overcome, or are alerts take priority in messages? As you're saying, the system might be clogged with people sending texts to one another. Are alerts able to take priority over non-emergency messages?
That's exactly right. That's why we built this specific technology to make sure that wireless emergency alerts get there quickly.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gaynor and Mr. Krakauer, in the days following a false alert in Hawaii last month, we realized that we don't necessarily train for mistakes. How are you adjusting your training and exercise policies to ensure that people working for you understand what to do if there is a false alert does go out?
Thank you, Mr. Payne. We have a generally robust training exercise program within the agency and with our external partners. This is an opportunity to look at, unfortunately, a unfortunate incident in Hawaii and take advantage of those lessons learned and apply them to your jurisdiction. So we've gone back to square one. We've had those people that are assigned to actually make these systems work, have the authority to do it, actually monitor how it's done, make sure they know how to do it, make sure if there's a shortfall in understanding of the system, and there's many systems that we rely on, that they know how to do it. It's readily available. Time is of the essence when these things happen. And so we've really doubled down on making sure that we really truly understand the system, so the hardware, all those things that go into it, and really the function of the system, because this requires a human in the chain. And with a human in the chain, there's going to be some difficulties with making mistakes. And I think the best way to avoid mistakes or increase that time is you have to touch it. You have to do it. You have to do it for real. You just can't read about it in a book. So we're all about training and exercise to make sure we can do it. Should you ask us in a minute or in a month or in a year, we want to be able to do it flawlessly and seamlessly. And
your training is germane to Rhode Island. Then with what they're doing in Hawaii, would probably you all have different policies and training, or is there an overall guide to what you should be working on?
So I think when it comes to how we interact with the federal systems, we prescribe to the federal training, federal exercise and procedures and policy. Every state is unique in how they apply that to their jurisdiction. I am unfamiliar with the exact protocols that Hawaii had. I would imagine that many of these protocols and policies are similar throughout the United States. But again, I'm going to take a guess that every state has a unique protocol that they follow, and it's up to us as state directors to make sure that it's right size for your state, right size for the hazards that you deal with on a daily basis, and making sure the public understands when that message goes out, it's for real.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Krakauer?
Thank you, sir. So with respect to training, our public warning team trains on a weekly basis. We call it WIA Wednesday in New York City. And every Wednesday, the public warning team is required to send out a test message. It does not go all the way out to the public. We use FEMA's testing system. and wait for the acknowledgement codes back from IPAWS. With respect to policies and procedures, we view WIA as a two-person job in New York City, both during training and during live emergency operations. There is a public warning specialist who is on the keys, entering that message, filling out the form to make sure we hit all the check boxes and get all the information necessary so that it does go out to the public when the emergency is happening. Standing right behind them is an on-duty supervisor who is making sure that policy and procedure is being followed to the letter. Those trainings are custom to the software applications that we have in New York City, which are going to be different than they have in Rhode Island or different than they have in Hawaii. There's not one software system that integrates with FEMA's system. It's up to local jurisdictions what they ultimately purchase.
Okay. And to you gentlemen, once again, alerts and warnings are used to warn the public of both natural and man-made disasters. And when an alert goes out, is it important that the follow-up advice government entities issue is consistent? Can you talk about how you coordinate public messaging among relevant state and local agencies and neighboring jurisdictions when appropriate after an initial emergency alert goes out?
Sure. So in New York City, once we issue an alert, a lot of our neighboring jurisdictions also receive those alerts either through the IPAWS system or through our own distribution list. Another system that we've developed is something called the Regional Emergency Liaison Team, RELT, and that's the neighboring jurisdictions' emergency managers. It's actually a protocol that New York State institutes. And soon after or leading up to an emergency, we all get on a conference call and share what our individual jurisdictions are doing, what our message is, and act as consistently as possible.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Gaynor?
The state, we have a policy called the State Emergency Notification Policy that has all major stakeholders involved. There's certain processes and protocols that we use in that. I think similar to New York, I think the first thing we do with key decision makers is we have a conference call, whether that's on a telephone or on HISN, depending on what the subject matter is. And then multiple groups within our state system called Code Red communities that we can notify. So whether it's local emergency managers or it's hospitals or it's all of them together, we can, with some fidelity, we can tailor that message and get it to those groups pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you. Chair, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Rhode Island who was kind enough to invite Mr. Gaynor to be a member of our panel, Mr. Langevin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing here today, and I want to thank our panel of witnesses, and thank you for your testimony. I particularly want to extend a personal welcome to our Director of EMA, Peter Gaynor, who's doing, in my estimation, in every measure, an excellent job as our director, and it's an honor to have you here today. Let me start out with Mr. Gaynor and asking if there's anything else you wanted to add. Again, I understand that the REMA has used its statewide system, Code Red, and also IPAWS to issue alert warnings to Rhode Islanders about severe weather events. Any further description you'd like to offer in terms of the experience with that system to describe REMA's use of the alerting system and the importance of original alerts and warnings to the citizens of Rhode Island?
Thank you, Congressman, for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, looking at what has happened across the country, what happened today, what happened in Hawaii, we want to take advantage of this opportunity, never to let a crisis go really unused, so we want to take advantage of that. I have a particular interest now to understand not only systems like WIA and EAS, but really how all these systems are strung together in a scenario. So whether FEMA is announcing some sort of indication and warning over the National Alert System, NWAS, what does that really mean for a state? What actions are they asking us to do? What actions is FEMA doing on behalf of the state? And how do we interact, and how do we get that right down to the lowest level? So as a state director, I'm kind of in the middle between the federal government, and I'm talking about a major catastrophic event. How do you meld those two worlds together to make sure you save time, you get a clear, concise message to everyone that's affected so they can take proactive, protective measures to save themselves, their families, and their community.
Thank you, thank you. And again, to you, Mr. Gaynor, and certainly our witnesses are also welcome to comment. But obviously, cybersecurity risk remains one of the risks that Rhode Island and probably most other states is least prepared to mitigate, given the challenges associated with it. How could an incident targeting our emergency management systems, including alerts and warning systems, affect your agency's ability to operate?
I think it's everyone's worst nightmare that you cannot use these systems that we rely on every day. The cell phone is, everyone has one. It's how we communicate. And the question that I have been asking my staff, my fellow directors in New England and others is, what happens if we cannot communicate via these things that operate perfectly in a blue sky scenario? How do you actually take those alert and warnings and get them down to the local taxpayer, resident in your community? How do you do that? I'm not sure I have the answer. I think one of the gentlemen up here said the backbone of how we do it now is the radio system, and that is it. But should the radio system fail, what's next? And I think we probably have to take a deeper look into that. I think cyber is a threat that is here to stay. It's touching every system that we build, and we probably have to take a real hard look about if all that fails, what are we going to do?
Sure. Good points, and it's one of my the worst case scenarios too, and things that keep me up at night as well. Let me turn to Mr. Bergman and Mr. Matheny. While the alert in Hawaii last month originated from an authorized sender, alert disseminators like broadcasters and wireless providers are not immune, certainly, from unauthorized use of warning systems. This was demonstrated in 2013 when pranksters actually hacked the emergency alert systems of local broadcasters in at least 2 states and issued false alerts about an impending zombie apocalypse. Obviously, these alerts were swiftly debunked, but the potential remains to severely undermine trust in the system. And so, to that point, what are the members of your organizations doing to secure alert systems like EAS or WIA and the new ATSC 3.0 standard from unauthorized access, including by cyber means? Anything you want to comment there?
Sure, it's okay. I'll start. We certainly take cybersecurity very seriously, and as an organization, we've been working with our members, and we have formed a cybersecurity task force. This is a group of CIOs and chief information security officers that meet regularly to share best practices. We have also had numerous seminars and webinars educating our members on good practices. We have a member portal that we have set up that has access to different resources, and we're in the process of developing a more extensive educational program. We really encourage the use of the NIST framework, which really plays on a lot of things around what's referred to as cyber hygiene. The idea of managing your passwords in a correct way, of setting up your equipment around and behind appropriately configured firewalls and protected networks, as well as who has physical access to the equipment. So we're working quite diligently to make sure that that folks are engaged on cybersecurity and creating the most secure as possible systems.
Thank you, Congressman. For the wireless industry, security is amongst our highest priorities. So we're very focused on protecting against cybersecurity threats, and I would really say on a 24/7, 365 basis. We know that those threats continue to evolve, but our members are very focused on it in terms of their everyday practices, the equipment they deploy, the practices that they use, the personnel. And they also embrace the NIST cybersecurity framework as well, too, and have worked within CTIA. We have a cybersecurity working group that convenes 30 members to share best practices, to share information. They're very oriented around risk assessment and risk management. So we work together to try to address those issues. We also work closely with our partners in the federal government as well, too. We worked closely with the FCC's CISRIC Advisory Committee to look at threats to the alerting systems. And of course, coordinate very closely with our partners at DHS on a daily basis to try to make sure that we're assessing and appropriately responding to any threats.
Very good. Well, my time's expired, but I want to thank all of our witnesses for testifying here today. Thank you for your insight, your input, and for the job you're doing to keep people safe. Thank you. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. I want to, because you came all the way here and your expertise is so valuable to us, we each want to ask one more question. This committee has always had action items after our hearings. We don't just gather testimony. We actually do something with the information that you provide us with. So to everyone on the panel, I'd just like to ask, what would you like to see this committee do, whether it be in the area of emergency management, responding, whether it be in the area of wireless or in broadcasting? What could this committee do to help you to protect the citizens of this nation better than we're already protecting them? Mr. Matheny?
Sure, thank you very much. I think if I had one ask to make, it would be to ask for your support of the Viewer Protection Act. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the process of the repack. We've got over 1,000 TV stations moving, 700 radio stations that are going to be impacted. And in the context of what we're talking about today, those are all emergency alert providers. They are all part of this system, and we cannot afford to have any of them taken offline because of a timeline that is unreasonable or because of lack of funding. And Chairman Pai has testified that there is a significant shortfall in funding, and we also believe that probably to the tune of about $1 billion. And so we would love to see support for the Viewer Protection Act.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bergman?
Mr. Chairman, I'd highlight 3 things for you. The first is Congress has a unique role in terms of making more spectrum available for use by the wireless industry, and that's really key to increasing capacity. The second is Congress also plays a key role in terms of promoting infrastructure deployment. So we talked a little bit about coverage earlier. By enabling the wireless industry to build out that next generation of wireless networks, which is based on small cells, we can, again, increase that ability to target those messages. And last, I think we're all interested and invested in making sure that we're exchanging best practices, that alert originators have access to all of the information about the tools that are available. And so working together to promote those kinds of best practices would help as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gaynor?
I'll go back to my training exercise theme. I think in the past we've tested systems, see if the systems work. Can you get that message from point A to point B? And I think that's important. So I would like to see more scenario-based alert and warning training and exercises. And again, you can do it for a state, you can do it for a region, you can do it for the country, and pick a scenario that is applicable and run that through the entire course, right? Make sure it works from beginning to end through all the systems, and prove that you can get that message out should a local, state, or federal government need to do it. So again, more realistic training, I think, is what I'd like to see.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Krakauer?
Mr. Chairman, I would highlight 2 things. First, we thank you and the members of the subcommittee for your continued support of the Urban Area Securities Initiative and preserving that money. We think in light of today's threats, it's very important that that money continue not just to be preserved, but increased in lots of areas, but certainly in terms of public warning. The other thing I would note to the committee is that the situation in Hawaii highlighted a good question for us as local emergency managers: is our state and local governments the right avenue to respond to a national threat from a state actor? And we think that the federal government should look at making that a federal responsibility as part of the whether it's FEMA or the Homeland Security or the Department of Defense. The federal government really is in the best position to detect a threat from a state actor and issue warnings initially to the general public. time is of the essence, and state and local authorities are not really in the best position to make those notifications.
I thank you all for your testimony, your candid answers to my questions and the rest of the panel, and I want to thank each of you for your dedication and commitment to the safety of our nation. The Chair now recognizes Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bergman, as you know, mobile customers are able to opt out of most WIA alerts. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm concerned that the false alerts and alert fatigue could, in fact, lead to people to opt out of WIA alerts. And today, Mr. Krakauer suggested that Congress eliminate the opt-out option. Does the CTIA agree?
So thanks, Mr. Congressman. You're exactly correct. Today, consumers are able to opt out of Amber Alerts and imminent threat alerts, but not presidential alerts, and that's part of the WARN Act. I think from our perspective, we would defer to policymakers on the appropriateness of opt-in versus opt-out. I think we would like to see consumers use wireless emergency alerts. We recognize that they want access by their wireless device, and they recognize how valuable that is. So our goal has been to try to make sure we do everything that we can to minimize alerting fatigue, and to make sure that the system has trust and confidence, and we'll do everything that we can to execute on that.
Okay, in the meantime, what are your members doing to educate customers on the value of the warnings and alerts?
Sure. So we certainly work closely with the FCC, with FEMA in terms of education efforts. We've done a PSA at CTIA to try to let folks know about it. I think the good news is that you have subscribers representing 99% of the overall U.S. subscribership that get their service from a wireless provider who voluntarily participates in WIA.
Okay. Well, I thank you, all of you, for being here, for your testimony. It's been very valuable. And as the chairman said, that we will be using this information to craft legislation in the future. So with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Thank you, Mr. Payne. The chair recognizes, nope, the chair recognizes that Mr. Langevin has left. And I want to thank all witnesses for their valuable testimony, the members of my committee for their insightful questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will remain open for 10 days. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.